Inez Sutton was sitting alone at the best table in the restaurant where Corey had proposed 15 years ago when he walked in holding another woman's hand. The woman wore a red dress, a diamond bracelet Inez had found the receipt for that morning, and the smile of someone who believed she had already won. Corey didn't look ashamed. He pulled out the chair beside him for her and said, "Inez, this is Brielle. She's someone important to me." For 3 seconds, Inez forgot how to breathe. Then she smiled, called the waiter over, and ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne in the entire restaurant. Because if Corey wanted to humiliate her on their anniversary, he was about to pay for the lesson. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments if your husband brought another woman to your anniversary dinner. Would you cry, confront him, or smile and make your exit unforgettable? The next morning, the Sutton house looked exactly the way it always had. Perfect. Sunlight poured through the massive kitchen windows, touching the marble countertops Inez had personally chosen 12 years earlier when Corey got his first major promotion. The coffee machine hummed softly. Fresh lilies sat in a crystal vase near the sink. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked peaceful. And somehow that made the silence worse. Inez stood barefoot in the kitchen, wearing one of Corey's old Yale sweatshirts, staring at the untouched cup of coffee growing cold between her hands. Corey still hadn't come home. At 8:17 a.m., his assistant finally texted her. "Corey is in an early board meeting this morning. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what he had done the night before." Inez read the message twice before setting her phone down slowly. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, and this was how he chose to end it. Not with honesty, not with dignity, but with humiliation carefully staged in a restaurant full of people who knew them. A part of her still couldn't fully process it, because Corey Sutton hadn't always been cruel. That was the dangerous thing about men like Corey. They didn't start cruel. They became cruel slowly, one entitled decision at a time. Inez walked toward the wall of windows overlooking the backyard. Their home sat inside one of the wealthiest gated communities in Connecticut, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and identical luxury homes that all looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. For years, people envied her life. The successful husband, the beautiful home, the elegant dinner parties, the vacations in Aspen and Lake Como, the carefully curated marriage that looked untouchable from the outside. But nobody saw the invisible labor underneath it. Nobody saw Inez waking up at 5 in the morning before investor dinners because Corey wanted the house flawless. Nobody saw her memorizing the names of executives' wives so Corey would appear thoughtful and connected. Nobody saw her canceling client meetings from her own interior design business because Corey needed her at another corporate event. And nobody saw the way Corey slowly began treating her kindness like a household appliance. Useful, expected, replaceable. Inez closed her eyes. She could still hear Brielle's voice from the restaurant. "He told me you already knew?" The humiliation of it crawled under her skin all over again. Brielle couldn't have been older than 28, beautiful in the polished, curated way social media had taught younger women to be. Perfect hair, perfect lips, perfect confidence. But what hurt wasn't Brielle. It was Corey's expression while sitting beside her. Comfortable, relaxed, almost relieved, like he had been waiting to stop pretending. Inez swallowed hard and forced herself not to cry. No, not yet. She had spent too many years crying privately for a man who barely noticed anymore. Her eyes drifted toward the dining room. That room used to make her proud. Now it felt like evidence. The long oak table, the imported chandelier, the expensive china Corey loved showing off to clients. Every detail in this house carried her fingerprints. Corey loved taking credit for having great taste, but it had always been Inez. Always. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Lorraine Sutton, Corey's mother. Inez hesitated before answering. "Hello," Lorraine sounded exhausted. "Oh, sweetheart." That one sentence nearly broke her. Because Lorraine knew? Of course she knew. Women like Lorraine always knew before wives did. I'm sorry, Lorraine whispered. I truly am. Inez leaned against the counter. How long? Silence. Too much silence. Finally, Lorraine exhaled shakily. A few months. A few months. The words sliced through Inez more sharply than she expected. Not because Corey cheated, but because he had looked her in the eyes every single day while building another relationship behind her back. I didn't know he would do something so. Public Lorraine continued quietly. I thought he would handle this privately. Handle this? As if 15 years of marriage were a business inconvenience. Inez laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because if she didn't laugh, she might collapse. He introduced her to me like she was a new assistant, she whispered. Lorraine went silent again. Inez, Corey has changed. No, Inez thought. He didn't change. He just stopped hiding who he was. After the call ended, Inez wandered upstairs into the master bedroom. Their bedroom. Though suddenly it no longer felt like hers. Corey's side of the closet stood half open. Expensive suits lined perfectly in rows. Watches displayed inside glass cases. Shoes polished. Corey loved beautiful things. That realization hurt too. Because once upon a time, he had loved her that way too. Back when they lived in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Back before money changed him. Back when Corey used to kiss paint off her fingers while she worked on design sketches late at night. Back when he told her she made every room feel alive. Inez sat on the edge of the bed and remembered the exact moment things began disappearing between them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one giant betrayal. It was gradual neglect. Corey missing dinners, then anniversaries, then conversations, then eye contact. Eventually, even when he sat beside her, it felt like he had already left. Still, she stayed. Because women like Inez were taught that loyalty meant endurance, that love meant understanding, that marriage required sacrifice. And maybe it did. But sacrifice was supposed to go both ways. Her gaze drifted toward the framed photograph on the nightstand. 15 years ago. Corey holding her waist on a beach in Nantucket. Both of them smiling like they had discovered something sacred. Inez picked up the frame slowly, then turned it face down. For the first time in years, the room felt honest. Her phone buzzed again. Corey. She stared at his name flashing across the screen. Once seeing his calls made her heart race. Now it filled her with dread. She answered without speaking. Corey sounded irritated immediately. You embarrassed me last night. Inez blinked slowly. Not hello. Not are you okay. You brought another woman to our anniversary dinner. Corey exhaled sharply, like she was being unreasonable. Brielle is part of my life now. I was trying to handle this like adults. Adults. The word made something cold settle inside her chest. You humiliated me in public. You ordered a $12,000 bottle of champagne and disappeared. There it was. The money mattered more to him than her pain. Inez suddenly saw everything clearly. Corey wasn't calling because he regretted hurting her. He was calling because for the first time in 15 years, she had disrupted his control. You know what's interesting? Inez said quietly. Corey sighed impatiently. What? You still think the champagne was the cruelest thing that happened at that table? Silence. For one brief second, Corey had no response. Then his voice hardened again. We need to discuss the divorce like civilized people. The word divorce echoed through the bedroom. So casual. So prepared. Like he had rehearsed it already. Inez closed her eyes. Last night had been the death of illusion. But this morning was the birth of something else. Something sharper. Something awake. You should come home tonight, Corey said coldly. We'll go over the paperwork. Paperwork. As though 15 years could fit inside a stack of legal documents. Inez looked around the room one last time. At the luxury furniture, the silk curtains, the king-sized bed, the life she had spent years protecting. And for the first time, she realized none of it had ever truly belonged to her. Then Corey said the one sentence that changed everything. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. Inez's expression slowly hardened, because suddenly she understood something Corey didn't. Ugly had already arrived, and he was the one who brought it into their home. By 6:30 that evening, the Sutton house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a negotiation room. Inez stood in front of the bathroom mirror upstairs, fixing her makeup with unnaturally steady hands. She had spent the entire afternoon drifting through the house like a ghost touching furniture. She chose books, she arranged photographs, she framed. Every object carried a memory, and every memory now felt contaminated. Downstairs, she heard the front door open. Corey was home. His voice echoed faintly through the foyer as he spoke on the phone. Yes, postpone the investor dinner. A pause. No, everything's under control. Inez almost laughed at that. Under control. That was Corey's favorite phrase. He said it whenever he wanted to force chaos into a shape that benefited him. She took one slow breath before walking downstairs. Corey stood in the kitchen, loosening his tie, looking expensive and exhausted. His charcoal coat hung over one arm, while his phone rested against his shoulder. The moment he saw Inez, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, annoyance. He ended the call quickly. We need to keep this civilized. There it was again. Civilized. As though he were negotiating a merger instead of dismantling a marriage. Inez folded her arms quietly. You brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner. Corey dropped his keys onto the counter with a sharp clink. Can you stop using words like that? Inez stared at him in disbelief. Mistress, yes. She's not some scandal. Inez, Brielle and I. You humiliated me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Corey immediately looked irritated by her emotion. That hurt more than the betrayal itself, because once upon a time, Corey used to care when she cried. Now her pain inconvenienced him. Corey sighed heavily, like a tired executive forced into an unnecessary meeting. Our marriage has been dead for a long time. The sentence landed softly, but it shattered something anyway. Inez swallowed. Dead for who? Corey didn't answer immediately, because they both knew the truth. Inez had still been trying, still cooking dinners Corey barely touched, still asking about his day, still booking anniversary reservations, still believing distance could be repaired if she loved him carefully enough. Corey walked toward the wine cabinet and poured himself bourbon without asking if she wanted anything. That small act somehow said everything. I didn't want this to become dramatic, he said calmly. Inez stared at him. You brought another woman to the restaurant where you proposed to me. Corey rubbed his forehead impatiently, because sneaking around would have been worse. The cruelty of that logic almost took her breath away. He truly believed honesty erased humiliation. Like betrayal became noble if delivered confidently. You could have left me privately, she whispered. Corey took a sip of bourbon. I was trying to. No, he wasn't trying to leave privately. He was trying to transition smoothly from one woman into another without damaging his reputation. That was the difference. Inez suddenly remembered something Brielle had said at the restaurant. He told me you already knew. At the time, it sounded cruel. Now, it sounded strategic. Corey had already rewritten the story before she even entered the room. He probably told Brielle the marriage was basically over, that Inez was cold, distant, emotionally unstable, maybe even difficult. Men like Corey never cheated as villains in their own minds. They cheated as misunderstood heroes escaping unhappy wives. You made me look insane, Inez said quietly. Corey's expression hardened immediately. Don't start acting like a victim. That sentence hit harder than she expected, because suddenly she saw the entire marriage clearly. Every time she expressed hurt, Corey reframed it as overreaction. Every disappointment became her sensitivity. Every absence became her insecurity. Every sacrifice became expected. I gave you 15 years, she whispered. Corey leaned back against the counter. And I gave you this life. The room went silent. There it was, the real Corey. Not the polished executive, not the charming husband at charity galas, the man underneath it all, a man who believed money erased emotional debt. Inez felt something inside her finally stop pleading. You think this house means I owe you loyalty forever? Corey laughed once under his breath. No, I think you benefited from this marriage too. Benefited. As if love were a transaction. As if she had merely occupied luxury, while Corey alone built everything. Inez stared at him for several seconds. Then she asked quietly, do you even remember who paid the deposit on your first office? Corey frowned slightly. What does that have to do with anything? You told me your investors backed out. You offered to help. I paid it back. No, Inez said softly. You never really did. His jaw tightened. For the first time all evening, Corey looked slightly uncomfortable. Good. He should. Because the truth was uglier than he wanted to admit. Back when Corey was still ambitious instead of arrogant, Inez had quietly liquidated part of an inheritance account from her grandmother to help him secure office space for Sutton Consulting Group. At the time, Corey cried in her arms and promised he would spend the rest of his life proving she made the right choice believing in him. Now, he acted like she had contributed nothing. Corey straightened. This isn't about 15 years ago. No, Inez replied. It's about the fact that you conveniently forgot who stood beside you before anyone else did. His expression darkened. You're romanticizing things. Inez almost smiled. That was Corey's gift, reducing emotional truth into something irrational. Did you love her? She asked suddenly. Corey blinked. What, Brielle? He hesitated. And somehow that hesitation hurt more than a direct answer, because it meant he was calculating, managing optics. Even now, it's complicated. Inez let out a slow breath. Of course, complicated. Men always called betrayal complicated when they wanted to avoid accountability. You know what's funny? She said softly. Corey looked irritated again. What I would have respected you more if you'd simply admitted you were selfish. His eyes narrowed. That's unfair. Unfair. The word almost made her laugh. Unfair was spending 15 years building someone's life only to be replaced by a younger woman at your anniversary dinner. Unfair was watching your husband mourn a champagne bill more passionately than your humiliation. Corey set his glass down harder this time. I'm trying to handle this maturely. No, Inez said calmly. You're trying to handle this comfortably. That landed. She saw it immediately in his face. For the first time, Corey no longer looked completely certain of himself, because Inez was no longer reacting the way she always had. She wasn't begging, wasn't crying, wasn't bargaining. That unsettled him. Corey grabbed his briefcase from the kitchen island and unzipped it sharply. I had attorneys draft something fair. Fair. Another word wealthy men loved using right before offering women far less than they deserved. He pulled out a stack of papers and slid them across the counter toward her. Divorce documents. Inez stared at them without touching them. Her chest tightened anyway. Because no matter how cruel Corey became part of her, still remembered the man who once danced with her barefoot in tiny apartments while eating takeout Chinese food. Grief was cruel that way. It mourned people long after they disappeared. You should sign quickly, Corey said. The cleaner we make this, the easier it'll be for both of us. Both of us. But Corey already had Brielle, already had his escape route, already had emotional preparation. Inez was the only one bleeding in real time. You planned this for months, didn't you? She asked quietly. Corey didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Inez finally looked up at him fully, and for the first time in years, she stopped seeing him as the center of her world. He was just a man, a selfish man, a weak man hiding behind expensive suits and polished confidence. And suddenly he looked much smaller than he used to. Then Corey said quietly, "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Inez looked down at the divorce papers, then back at her husband, and something cold and steady settled inside her chest, because Corey still believed he was the one controlling how this story ended. He had no idea Inez Sutton was finally waking up. Corey left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter like they were dinner menus. Then he walked upstairs to shower, just like that, as though detonating 15 years of marriage was emotionally equivalent to rescheduling a meeting. Inez remained standing alone in the kitchen long after he disappeared. The house was silent except for the faint sound of running water upstairs. Her eyes drifted slowly toward the papers. White pages, black ink, clean legal language designed to make devastation look professional. She walked closer carefully, almost unwilling to touch them. At the top, in bold letters, she saw "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." The words made her stomach tighten. This was real. Not a fight, not a temporary affair, not a midlife crisis Corey would eventually regret and apologize for. He had already planned the ending. Inez pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. The kitchen lights reflected softly against the marble countertops she once spent weeks selecting because Corey wanted the house to feel timeless. Funny. Men always wanted timeless things, while treating women like temporary conveniences. She picked up the first page. Her eyes scanned paragraph after paragraph. Property division, confidentiality clauses, financial arrangements. And then she saw it. The settlement offer. A cold laugh nearly escaped her throat. Corey wanted the house. Of course he did. He also wanted the majority of their investment portfolio protected from unnecessary marital dispute. Unnecessary. As if her existence inside the marriage had become an inconvenience to his future. Her chest tightened harder the more she read. There were paragraphs carefully written to minimize her contribution to their shared life. No mention of the money she invested in Corey's first office. No mention of the years she spent hosting networking events. No mention of the clients she abandoned for his career. No mention of caring for Martin Sutton during chemotherapy while Corey traveled for business. Nothing. According to these documents, Corey Sutton had apparently built his empire alone. The cruelty of that almost impressed her. Not because he cheated, but because he erased her. The shower upstairs stopped running. Inez quickly placed the papers back down. A few minutes later, Corey walked downstairs wearing gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, looking painfully familiar. That was the dangerous thing about heartbreak. Sometimes the person destroying you still looked like home. Corey opened the refrigerator casually. "You read them," Inez stared at him. "You're trying to leave me with almost nothing." Corey shut the fridge door harder than necessary. "That's not true. You listed my contributions as domestic support." Corey sighed immediately, already irritated. "That's legal terminology." "No," Inez said quietly. "That's disrespect." He grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. "You're emotional right now." There it was again. Emotional. Corey's favorite weapon whenever Inez said something inconveniently true. He twisted the cap open. "You didn't work for the company, Inez." Her expression hardened. "I built half your image." Corey laughed once under his breath. "Come on." That tiny dismissive laugh snapped something inside her chest. Because suddenly, she remembered every invisible thing she had done, every charity gala she organized, every investor wife she charmed, every social disaster she quietly prevented, every speech she helped Corey rehearse, every emotional collapse she absorbed so he could walk into boardrooms looking powerful. Corporate men love pretending they succeeded alone, but women like Inez often carried entire reputations on their backs without getting credit for any of it. "You think those men trusted you because of your spreadsheets?" she asked softly. Corey narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means people liked you because I made them comfortable around you." He scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "No," she said calmly. "What's ridiculous is how thoroughly you convinced yourself you became successful alone." The tension between them thickened instantly. Corey took a slow sip of water, studying her differently now. like he was realizing she wasn't reacting according to script anymore. That unsettled him. Good. It should. You're rewriting history, he said finally. Inez almost smiled. That was rich. The man literally handing her legal paperwork designed to erase her contribution was accusing her of rewriting history. Corey walked toward the kitchen island. I'm trying to avoid a messy divorce. You should have thought about that before bringing another woman to our anniversary dinner. His jaw tightened immediately. You keep focusing on the dinner. Because it mattered. Corey rubbed his forehead. I was trying to be honest. No, Inez replied quietly. You were trying to make sure she felt chosen. That landed directly. She saw it in his eyes. For one brief second, Corey looked exposed, because that was exactly what he had been doing. The dinner wasn't honesty, it was performance, a public transition, a way to reassure Brielle that she was no longer temporary, and a way to pressure Inez into behaving gracefully while being replaced. Corey looked away first. I didn't want lies anymore. Inez stared at him in disbelief. You lied for months. That's different. How Corey exhaled impatiently, because the marriage was already over. Again. That phrase, like repeating it enough times would make it true for both of them, but Inez remembered the anniversary reservation she made 2 weeks ago, the therapy article she sent Corey last month, the dinner she cooked 3 nights ago while he barely looked up from his phone. She had still been inside the marriage. Corey had simply exited quietly without informing her. The realization hollowed her out. Did Brielle know you were still sleeping in our bed? Inez asked suddenly. Corey froze, just slightly, but enough. Inez. No, answer me. He looked away again, and that silence told her everything. A sick feeling rolled through her stomach, because now she could picture it clearly. Corey texting Brielle from this house, maybe while Inez slept upstairs, maybe while she planned anniversary dinners, maybe while she folded his clothes. Humiliation burned through her chest so sharply she almost couldn't breathe. Corey noticed her expression and softened his tone slightly. Look, I never wanted to hurt you. That sentence nearly made her laugh. Men always said that after choosing the exact actions guaranteed to hurt you most. You didn't accidentally hurt me, she whispered. You strategically humiliated me. Corey's patience visibly thinned. I'm not doing this all night. Of course not. Because emotional discomfort exhausted him when he wasn't the center of sympathy. He glanced toward the papers again. You should have your own attorney review everything if it makes you feel better. If it makes you feel better. Like fairness were emotional rather than legal. Inez looked down at the documents again. Then something caught her eye. One paragraph specifically referenced several protected financial accounts connected to Sutton Consulting Group. Protected before division. Interesting. Very interesting. She remembered Lorraine's voice earlier that morning. He's been preparing this for months, which meant Corey likely moved things already. Prepared exits already, protected assets already. The realization made her suddenly still. Too still. Corey noticed immediately. What Inez looked up slowly. Did you move money? His face changed instantly. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for her intuition to sharpen. Corey straightened. Excuse me? You heard me? That's an insane accusation. Maybe, but his reaction didn't feel innocent. And suddenly, Inez remembered the expensive apartment photos Brielle posted occasionally online. Designer furniture, luxury views, places Corey claimed he'd never spend money on because it's financially irresponsible, unless the spending benefited him. Corey grabbed the papers sharply. You're spiraling. No, Inez said quietly. I'm finally paying attention. The room went silent. A different silence this time. Not grief, awareness. Corey looked at her carefully now, almost cautiously. Because for the first time since walking into that restaurant with Brielle, Inez Sutton no longer looked heartbroken. She looked dangerous. Then Corey said quietly, Don't turn this into a war. Inez held his gaze steadily. And for the first time in 15 years, Corey was the one who looked uncertain. Corey slept in the guest room that night, not because he felt guilty, because he was angry. Inez realized that sometime around 3 in the morning, while lying awake in the enormous bed that suddenly felt too cold and too empty. Corey wasn't mourning the marriage. He was mourning inconvenience, the loss of comfort, the loss of control, the loss of a woman who had spent 15 years making his life easier. That realization sat heavily in her chest as dawn crept through the bedroom windows. By 7:30, she was already downstairs dressed in cream slacks and a soft cashmere sweater, standing in the kitchen with her laptop open. For the first time in years, Inez wasn't preparing Corey's schedule. She was looking through financial records. At first, it felt almost ridiculous. Corey handled most of the important financial matters in the marriage. At least that's what he always implied. Inez managed the home, the entertaining, the emotional labor, the aesthetics of their life. Corey managed the money, or so he liked to believe. But now that she was paying attention carefully, small things began bothering her. Large transfers, consulting expenses, luxury charges filed under corporate accounts, and one repeating detail. Carter Strategies LLC, Brielle. A strange chill moved through her body. Inez clicked deeper into the records she still had access to through shared household accounts. Payments, monthly. Increasing over time, at first modest, then absurd, $20,000, $30,000, $45,000. Her stomach twisted. Corey wasn't just having an affair. He was financing a second life. The front door opened suddenly. Corey entered already dressed for work in a navy suit, carrying his phone and car keys. He stopped when he saw her at the kitchen island. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Corey's eyes moved toward the laptop screen. "What are you doing?" Inez closed the computer slowly. "Learning." Corey immediately looked irritated. "You don't need to dig through company finances." "Why not?" "Because it's none of your business." The sentence landed sharply. None of your business. Funny. After 15 years of marriage, after hosting investor dinners inside this very kitchen, after sacrificing her own career to support his, now suddenly, she was being informed she had no business understanding the empire she helped stabilize. Inez folded her hands together calmly. "You used company money on Brielle." Corey's jaw tightened instantly. "That's not what happened. So Carter Strategies LLC is fake. It's a legitimate consulting contract." Inez stared at him. $45,000 a month. Corey tossed his keys onto the counter. "You don't understand corporate retention structures." There it was again. The condescending tone, the implication that she was too domestic to understand money, too emotional to understand strategy, too feminine to understand power. But Corey kept forgetting something important. Interior design had been a business too. Before marriage swallowed it whole, Inez negotiated contracts, handled luxury clients, managed budgets, and built relationships. Corey just benefited from pretending she was smaller than she really was. "You're paying your girlfriend through the company," Inez said quietly. "She's not just my girlfriend." The words slipped out before Corey could stop them. Silence filled the kitchen instantly. Interesting. Not just my girlfriend, meaning Brielle occupied a larger space in his life than he originally intended to admit. Corey seemed to realize his mistake immediately. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." His expression darkened. "You're trying to twist everything into something ugly." Inez almost laughed, as if the ugliness hadn't started the moment he walked into their anniversary dinner, holding another woman's hand. Corey checked his watch impatiently. "I don't have time for this." "Of course not," Inez replied softly. "You're probably late for Brielle." That hit. Hard. She saw it in the brief flash of anger across his face. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable for once. Corey grabbed his coat from the chair. "You need to stop acting irrationally." "Irrational," Inez repeated. "Yes." The audacity of it almost impressed her. Corey cheated publicly, prepared divorce papers secretly, possibly hid money, and somehow she was still the irrational one. That was the thing about manipulative men. They often committed cruelty with complete confidence because they truly believed their own narratives. Corey genuinely saw himself as reasonable. That realization frightened her more than the affair itself, because it meant he felt justified. Corey headed toward the door before pausing suddenly. There's a gala next Friday. Inez frowned slightly. What? The company gala? He adjusted his cufflinks. We should still attend together? For a second, Inez thought she misheard him. You brought another woman to our anniversary dinner. Corey sighed heavily, like she was exhausting him. And making a public spectacle now would hurt both of us. Both of us. Again? Always both of us when Corey needed cooperation. Never both of us when he made selfish choices. You want me to pretend I want maturity? No. He wanted image control. That's what this was really about. Corey Sutton cared about reputation the way some men cared about religion. His public identity mattered more than intimacy, more than honesty, maybe even more than love. We built a life together, Corey continued. I'm trying to protect what can still be protected. Inez stared at him quietly. You mean your image? For once, Corey didn't answer immediately, which meant she was right. A heavy silence settled between them. Then Corey softened his tone slightly. And somehow, that almost hurt more. You're still important to me, Inez. The sentence nearly shattered her. Not because it was romantic, because it was cruel. Important. After 15 years of marriage, she had been reduced to important. Like a valuable employee being laid off respectfully. Inez looked at the man she once loved more than herself. And suddenly, she realized something devastating. Corey had probably stopped seeing her as a woman years ago. He saw her as infrastructure, reliable, stable, useful, invisible until damaged. You should go, she said quietly. Corey studied her carefully, like he couldn't decide whether she was about to collapse or explode. But Inez did neither. That unsettled him most. Finally, he nodded once and walked out. A few seconds later, she heard his car engine disappear down the long driveway. The house fell silent again, but this silence felt different, sharper, awake. Inez stood motionless in the kitchen for several moments before reopening the laptop. Carter Strategies, LLC. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she opened another folder. Household accounts, transfers, tax summaries, expense reports, and there it was, a luxury apartment lease in Manhattan, paid partially through corporate reimbursement. Her heartbeat slowed dangerously. Corey told her for months that the apartment belonged to an out-of-state client, but the utilities were under Brielle Carter's name. Inez leaned back slowly in her chair. The betrayal no longer felt emotional alone. It felt calculated, structured, layered. Corey hadn't stumbled into an affair. He built one carefully while still sleeping beside his wife every night. A memory suddenly surfaced, 3 months earlier. Corey returning home late, smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume. Inez asking if he'd eaten dinner. Corey kissing her forehead absent-mindedly while texting someone else. At the time, she blamed stress. Now she understood. Women like Inez were trained to rationalize their own intuition, to doubt themselves before doubting men. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A text message from an unknown number. For one strange second, her stomach dropped instinctively. Then she opened it. A photograph loaded slowly onto the screen. Corey. Brielle. Kissing outside the Manhattan apartment building. The timestamp read 2 months earlier. Beneath the image was one sentence. He told everyone you stopped being his wife a long time ago. Inez stared at the message silently. Then very slowly, she smiled. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because for the first time since the anniversary dinner, the grief inside her chest was beginning to transform into something else. Something colder. Something focused. And somewhere deep down, Corey Sutton had just made a catastrophic mistake. He taught his wife how little mercy remained between them. Inez didn't reply to the anonymous text. She simply stared at the photograph for a long time. Corey's hand was wrapped possessively around Brielle's waist outside the Manhattan apartment building, both of them laughing like careless people who believed consequences belonged to other marriages. 2 months ago. 2 entire months ago. At that exact time, Inez had been sitting beside Martin Sutton's hospital bed, helping him sip water through a straw, while Corey claimed he was working late in the city. The realization made her physically ill, not just because Corey lied, but because she remembered how tenderly she cared for his father, while Corey built another relationship in secret. Martin Sutton died believing his son still had integrity. That hurt more than she expected. Inez locked the phone and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. Then she did something surprising. She made herself breakfast. Not because she was hungry, because she suddenly understood something important. Corey expected devastation. He expected tears, emotional collapse. What he did not expect was discipline. That realization steadied her hands as she cracked eggs into a pan. Outside the kitchen windows, the wealthy Connecticut neighborhood continued functioning normally. Luxury SUVs rolled quietly through pristine streets. Gardeners trimmed hedges. Dog walkers passed enormous stone houses built by men like Corey. Everything looked beautiful. And somehow beauty felt offensive now. By noon, Inez had transformed the dining room table into a temporary investigation space. Financial statements, tax records, corporate reimbursement reports, property documents. The deeper she looked, the more unsettling the pattern became. Corey hadn't simply cheated emotionally. He had organized his betrayal financially, carefully, methodically, like a man planning an exit strategy long before announcing it. Her phone rang suddenly. Naomi Pierce. Inez froze briefly before answering. Naomi had been her closest friend in college before life separated them into different worlds. Back then, Naomi was loud, ambitious, brilliant, and terrifyingly honest. Now she was one of Manhattan's top divorce attorneys. I heard Naomi said immediately. No greeting, just truth. Inez closed her eyes briefly. From who? Half of Connecticut. A bitter laugh escaped Inez before she could stop it. Of course. Public humiliation traveled quickly in wealthy circles, especially when powerful men were involved. Naomi's voice softened slightly. Are you okay? No. But somehow Inez couldn't say that aloud. Instead, she whispered, he brought her to our anniversary dinner. Silence. Then Naomi said very calmly, oh, I'm going to destroy him. For the first time in days, Inez almost smiled. Almost. Naomi continued immediately. Tell me everything. And so she did. The restaurant. Brielle. The divorce papers. The financial transfers. The Manhattan apartment. The company payments. The anonymous photograph. Naomi listened without interrupting once. By the end, her voice had gone frighteningly quiet. How much access do you still have to shared accounts? Some. Good. Start downloading everything immediately. Inez frowned slightly. You think he's hiding assets? I think wealthy men preparing divorces suddenly become very creative accountants. That sentence chilled her. Naomi continued. Did Corey ever have you sign anything unusual over the past year? Inez thought carefully, then froze. 6 months ago. Corey asked her to sign several routine restructuring documents related to liability protection for the company. At the time, she barely looked at them. She trusted him. Naomi immediately caught the silence. What Inez slowly sat down. There were documents. Naomi's voice sharpened instantly. What kind of documents? I don't know exactly. Corey said they were routine. Jesus Christ. Fear crept slowly into Inez's stomach. You think I signed something bad? I think you trusted your husband. The sadness in Naomi's voice somehow hurt more than panic would have, because trust should never feel like stupidity. But suddenly it did. Naomi exhaled sharply. I need you in my office tomorrow morning. I don't know if I'm ready for Inez. Naomi's tone cut through her immediately. This man publicly humiliated you while potentially moving marital assets behind your back. You do not have time to emotionally process this slowly. The directness stunned her. But deep down, Naomi was right. Corey had already started the war long before Inez realized there was one. After hanging up, Inez sat motionless for several minutes. Then she stood and walked upstairs toward the master bedroom. The room smelled faintly of Corey's cologne. For a brief second, grief hit her so violently she nearly doubled over, because no matter how angry she became, part of her still loved him. That was the humiliating truth nobody talked about in betrayal stories. Love didn't disappear the moment trust died. Sometimes it lingered painfully behind common sense. Inez opened Corey's closet slowly. Perfect rows of tailored suits stared back at her. Luxury watches, Italian shoes, order, control, performance. Corey Sutton curated himself the way museums curated exhibits. Nothing accidental, nothing vulnerable. Her eyes moved toward the top shelf. A black leather folder sat tucked near the back corner. Inez hesitated, then reached for it. Inside were property documents, insurance paperwork, and something else, a lease agreement. Her heartbeat slowed instantly. The Manhattan apartment. Brielle Carter listed as occupant. Corey Sutton listed as financial guarantor. The lease started 8 months ago. 8 months. Inez sat heavily on the edge of the bed. 8 months. At that point, Corey had still been kissing her goodbye every morning, still asking whether she wanted wine with dinner, still letting her plan vacations, still sleeping beside her every night. The psychological cruelty of that nearly suffocated her. How long had he emotionally left before physically announcing it? A knock downstairs startled her. Inez quickly closed the folder. Another knock, more aggressive this time. She walked downstairs carefully and opened the front door. Lorraine Sutton stood outside wearing oversized sunglasses, despite the cloudy afternoon. The moment she stepped inside, Inez knew something was wrong. Lorraine removed the glasses slowly. Her eyes were red. "I fought with Corey," she admitted quietly. Inez closed the door behind her. "What happened?" Lorraine looked around the beautiful kitchen with visible sadness. He said, "I'm taking your side." A strange ache moved through Inez's chest, because technically, Lorraine should have taken Corey's side. That was her son. Yet here she was, standing in the house her son was trying to dismantle. "I told him what he did was cruel," Lorraine continued. "And he said, you forced his hand." Inez blinked slowly. Forced. "He claims you stopped being his partner years ago." The cruelty of that statement hollowed her out instantly, because Corey benefited enormously from her partnership. He simply stopped valuing it. Lorraine stepped closer carefully. "There's something else you need to know." Fear crawled slowly up Inez's spine. What Lorraine hesitated, then reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded packet of papers. Emails. Printed emails. "I found these in Martin's study before the funeral," Lorraine whispered. "I didn't understand them at first." Inez unfolded the documents carefully. Her eyes scanned the pages. Legal discussions, financial language, references to protecting exposure before marital transition. Then one phrase froze her blood cold. Project Brielle. Her breathing slowed dangerously. "What is this?" Lorraine shook her head weakly. "I don't know exactly, but Corey's been planning something much longer than you realize." Inez stared at the papers silently. Suddenly, the affair itself no longer felt like the center of the betrayal. The affair was merely the visible part. Underneath it was something colder, something calculated, something strategic. Lorraine reached for her hand gently. "You need a lawyer immediately." Inez looked down at the emails again, at Corey's careful wording, at the financial discussions, at the legal preparation happening behind her back while she still believed she had a marriage worth saving. Then slowly, very slowly, the heartbreak inside her chest began transforming into clarity. And clarity was far more dangerous than grief, because grief begged, clarity prepared. Naomi Pierce's office sat on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper overlooking the Hudson River. Everything about the space radiated precision. Dark wood shelves, cream leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet power. The kind of office built by a woman who spent years surviving men who underestimated her. Inez stood outside the glass doors for several seconds before stepping inside. Her reflection in the polished surfaces startled her slightly. She looked exhausted, beautiful still, but fragile around the edges, like someone who had spent too long shrinking herself to fit inside another person's life. The receptionist smiled politely. "Ms. Sutton, Ms. Pierce is waiting for you." Naomi's office doors opened before Inez could answer. Naomi walked out in a tailored black suit and sharp heels, her dark curls pulled into a sleek knot. She looked exactly the same as she had in college, only richer and far more dangerous. The moment Naomi saw her fully, her expression softened. "Oh, honey." That nearly broke Inez instantly, because pity from strangers was humiliating, but tenderness from old friends was devastating. Naomi crossed the room and hugged her tightly. For one brief second, Inez let herself collapse into it. Not dramatically, just enough to remember what safety felt like. Then Naomi pulled back and studied her face carefully. He really destroyed his own life over a woman in a red dress and a superiority complex. A surprised laugh escaped Inez before she could stop it. Naomi smiled faintly. Good. Still alive in there. They moved into the office together. Within minutes, the warmth disappeared, and Naomi transformed completely into an attorney. Focused, sharp, controlled. Show me everything. For the next hour, Inez handed over documents piece by piece: financial statements, the apartment lease, the anonymous photograph, the emails Lorraine found. Naomi read everything with frightening concentration. The deeper she went, the colder her expression became. Finally, she leaned back slowly in her chair. "Well," she said quietly, "your husband is either arrogant, reckless, or incredibly stupid. Probably all three." Naomi nodded once. "That's the healthiest thing you've said so far." Inez stared down at her hands. "I keep thinking maybe I missed something. Maybe the marriage really died years ago, and I just refused to see it." Naomi's gaze softened slightly. "No, Inez. The marriage died when Corey decided your loyalty was permanent no matter how badly he treated you." Silence settled heavily between them. Naomi tapped one manicured nail against the stack of documents. "You know what men like Corey count on? What exhaustion." Inez frowned slightly. "They assume women will choose emotional survival over legal resistance." The sentence landed hard, because Naomi was right. A huge part of Inez wanted to disappear quietly, to avoid public ugliness, to avoid conflict, to simply escape the humiliation. But Corey knew that too. That's why he prepared the papers first. That's why he framed her as emotional. That's why he introduced Brielle publicly before the divorce was finalized. He was establishing narrative control. Naomi slid one document toward her. "Did you know your name still appears in the original founding capital filings?" Inez blinked. What Naomi turned the page toward her. "There." Inez stared at the old paperwork in disbelief. Her signature? Corey's signature. The original startup documents from Sutton Consulting Group nearly 16 years earlier. Back when they still lived in Brooklyn. Back when Corey still kissed her like she mattered more than ambition. "You retained partial financial positioning tied to initial investment structure," Naomi explained calmly. "I don't understand what that means." "It means Corey may have underestimated how legally connected you still are to the company's foundation." For the first time since entering the office, something flickered inside Inez. Not hope exactly, but awareness. Naomi leaned forward. "Let me ask you something honestly. Okay, who hosted Corey's early investors I did? Who designed the networking events I did? Who maintained the social relationships I did? Who supported him emotionally while he built the company Inez swallowed? I did." Naomi nodded slowly. Unpaid labor is still labor. The words hit harder than Inez expected, because nobody had ever said it like that before. Not Corey, not society, not even herself. For years, she treated her sacrifices like acts of love disconnected from value. But Corey built his public success partly on the invisible stability she provided. Naomi continued flipping through documents. Now let's discuss Brielle. Even hearing her name felt unpleasant. Naomi tapped the Carter Strategies payments. These numbers are absurd. You think it's fraud? I think it's very possible your husband used company structures to move money before divorce proceedings. Fear crept slowly into Inez's stomach. Corey wasn't just cheating emotionally anymore. This was becoming something larger, more dangerous. Naomi looked directly at her. I need you to answer carefully. Has Corey ever made you feel unintelligent about finances? A bitter laugh escaped immediately. Constantly. Good. Inez blinked. Good. That means he probably got sloppy. Naomi stood and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Arrogant men underestimate women, they emotionally diminish. They stop hiding things carefully because they convince themselves their wives don't understand enough to notice. She turned back toward Inez. That's how they get caught. The room fell quiet. Outside the windows, New York moved relentlessly below them. Taxis, meetings, deals, power. For years, Inez had orbited Corey's world like a supportive moon around a selfish planet. Now, suddenly, she was sitting in an office, realizing she might actually possess more leverage than Corey ever intended. The thought terrified her. Naomi returned to the desk. Here's what happens next. Her voice became clinical again. We freeze nothing emotionally. We react strategically. Inez nodded slowly. No emotional confrontations without documentation. Another nod. No signing anything. I already refused. Good. Naomi slid a legal pad toward her. And I want a complete timeline of the marriage. Inez frowned slightly. What kind of timeline? Everything. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Business dinners, investor events, financial contributions, caregiving, sacrifices, every invisible thing you did while Corey built his empire. Inez stared at her quietly, because suddenly, those things didn't feel invisible anymore. Naomi leaned back again, and one more thing. What? If Corey realizes you're becoming legally dangerous, he'll try one of two approaches. Inez's stomach tightened. What approaches charm or intimidation? That felt horrifyingly accurate. Naomi crossed her arms. He'll either remind you how much he once loved you, or he'll try convincing you that fighting back will destroy your life. A long silence followed. Then Naomi said quietly, don't let him rewrite your value while you're grieving him. That sentence settled directly into Inez's chest, because grief made women vulnerable to revision. It made them remember tenderness louder than disrespect. It made them question themselves. But somewhere between the anniversary dinner, the hidden apartment, the financial transfers, and the divorce papers, something inside Inez Sutton had begun waking up. Not revenge, not yet. Something more dangerous. Self-respect. Then Naomi closed the final folder and looked directly at her. Inez, yes. If Corey Sutton wanted a quiet divorce, her expression hardened slightly. He should have treated his wife with dignity before turning her into evidence. By the time Inez returned home from Manhattan, rain had started falling over Connecticut. The Sutton house stood glowing against the gray evening like a luxury hotel, warm lights, perfect windows, immaculate landscaping. Beautiful, cold, performative. She parked slowly in the circular driveway and sat inside the car for a full minute without moving. Naomi's words kept echoing in her mind. Charm or intimidation. Corey would eventually choose one. Maybe both? The terrifying part was that he knew exactly which emotional buttons still existed inside her. 15 years, gave a man access to your weak points. And Corey Sutton had always known how to weaponize emotional timing. Inez stepped inside the house quietly. The smell of cedar wood and expensive candles lingered faintly in the air. For years, she thought this house represented success. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to her own erasure. Voices drifted from the living room. Corey was home, and he was not alone. Inez slowed immediately. A woman laughed softly. Brielle. Something icy moved through her bloodstream. Corey brought her here, into the house, into Inez's home. For one brief moment, genuine rage flashed through her body so violently, she almost turned around and walked straight back outside. But then she heard Corey speaking. She's emotional right now. Inez froze. The humiliation of hearing herself discussed like a psychological inconvenience inside her own home nearly took her breath away. Brielle's voice lowered slightly. I still think this is cruel. Interesting. That Inez hadn't expected. Corey sighed heavily. You don't understand how dramatic Inez can get. There it was. Narrative control. Even now. Even after everything. Inez stepped fully into the living room. The silence was immediate. Corey stood near the fireplace, holding a whiskey glass. Brielle sat on the cream-colored sofa Inez personally designed the room around. The sight of her there felt invasive, intimate in the worst possible way. Brielle stood abruptly. Oh my God. Corey's face hardened instantly. Inez, no apology, no shame, just irritation that she interrupted his carefully managed environment. Brielle looked visibly uncomfortable now. Unlike the restaurant, she no longer appeared confident because the house changed things. Restaurants were performance spaces. Homes carried ghosts. Inez looked directly at Corey. You brought her here. Corey set down his drink slowly. We were talking. In my house? Our house. The correction came automatically, possessively, legally. And somehow that made it worse. Brielle grabbed her purse quickly. I should go. Corey immediately touched her arm. No stay. The gesture gutted Inez more than she wanted to admit, because Corey used to touch her that way. Protectively, automatically, without thinking. Now another woman occupied that reflex. Inez folded her arms tightly across her chest. You're unbelievable. Corey's patience visibly thinned. I'm not going to hide my life anymore. Life. Again. Like Brielle represented some enlightened new truth instead of selfish destruction. Inez looked at Brielle carefully for the first time. She was beautiful, but suddenly she also looked young, not childish, just inexperienced enough to still confuse attention with love. Brielle cleared her throat awkwardly. Corey told me things were basically over between you two. Of course he did. Corey stepped in immediately. They were. Inez looked at him slowly. Really? The quietness of her voice unsettled him more than yelling would have, because Corey expected emotional chaos, not calm clarity. You stopped speaking to me months ago, he continued defensively. You checked out of the marriage. Inez almost laughed. The audacity. She remembered begging Corey to attend therapy 6 months earlier, remembered sitting alone at dinners while he answered emails, remembered asking him repeatedly if something was wrong. But men like Corey often rewrote neglect as rejection, because accountability threatened their self-image. You mean I stopped entertaining your emotional laziness? She said quietly. Corey's eyes narrowed. There you go. There I go. What, trying to make me the villain? Inez stared at him in disbelief. He still couldn't see it. Or maybe worse, he could see it and simply didn't care. Brielle shifted uncomfortably beside him now. Good. Let her feel uncomfortable. Let her sit inside the reality of what she helped destroy. Corey stepped forward slightly. We need to discuss the divorce rationally. There it was again. Rationally. A word Corey used whenever he wanted emotions to disappear only for other people. Inez looked toward Brielle. Did he tell you he was still sleeping beside me every night? Corey's expression changed immediately. Inez. No, she said calmly. I'd like to know. Brielle's face paled slightly. Interesting. Maybe Corey hadn't been fully honest with either woman. That suddenly felt very possible. Brielle looked toward Corey uncertainly. You said things were separate already? Corey rubbed his forehead sharply. They emotionally were? Emotionally. A convenient technicality. Inez felt exhaustion settle heavily into her bones. Not sadness anymore. Just exhaustion. Because watching Corey manipulate language in real time was like watching a magician insist the audience imagine the trick. Then Corey made a mistake. A huge one. He sighed and said, "This is exactly why I waited so long to tell you." Silence. Total silence. Even Brielle looked startled, because that sentence admitted everything. Premeditation, cowardice, strategy. Inez stared at him slowly. You waited because you wanted to secure everything first. Corey's expression darkened instantly. That's not true. The apartment silence. The financial transfers. More silence. Brielle looked sharply toward Corey now. What transfers? Ah, interesting. Very interesting. Corey reacted too slowly, which meant Brielle didn't know everything either. Inez suddenly saw the dynamic clearly. Corey positioned himself differently with each woman. Victim with Brielle, provider with society, reasonable executive with attorneys, and difficult husband with Inez, every version carefully tailored. You told her the company pays for her apartment through consulting fees? Inez asked softly. Brielle's entire face changed. She turned toward Corey immediately. What Corey stepped forward fast. That's not what this is. But panic had entered the room now. Real panic. And Corey hated losing control. Brielle looked stunned. You said the apartment was temporary until things settled. Corey ran a hand through his hair aggressively. Can we not do this right now? No. Actually, this was exactly the right time. Because suddenly both women were seeing the same man clearly. And Corey knew it. Inez watched him carefully. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, he looked afraid. Not of losing her emotionally, of losing narrative control. That mattered more to Corey than love ever did. Brielle grabbed her coat quickly. You know what I'm leaving. Corey immediately followed her toward the foyer. Brielle, no? She turned sharply. You told me your marriage was basically over? It is. Then why does this feel like I walked into something unfinished? Because it was unfinished. Because Corey wanted emotional overlap. Not endings, not honesty. Overlap gave him comfort, security, admiration from one woman while another still maintained his life. Brielle looked deeply unsettled now. Good. Reality should unsettle her. She left a moment later, heels clicking sharply against the marble floors, before the front door slammed shut behind her. Silence swallowed the house instantly. Corey stood in the foyer, breathing hard, then slowly turned toward Inez. And there it was. The intimidation Naomi warned her about. His entire demeanor changed. Colder now. Sharper. You need to stop interfering. Inez blinked slowly. Interfering with my life. The sentence hit her harder than screaming would have. My life. As though she had somehow become external to it. Corey stepped closer. You're making this uglier than necessary. No, Inez said quietly. You did that the moment you turned me into a problem to manage. His jaw tightened. I'm serious. So am I. The silence between them thickened dangerously. Then Corey said the one thing that finally shattered the last illusion inside her. If you fight me on this, you will lose badly. Not sadly. Not emotionally. Strategically. Like a warning. Like a threat. And suddenly, Inez understood something terrifying. She was no longer standing across from a husband trying to leave a marriage. She was standing across from a man protecting power. And powerful men rarely surrendered gracefully. Corey left the house before sunrise the next morning. No goodbye? No apology? Just the distant sound of his car disappearing down the driveway, while rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows. Inez lay awake, staring at the ceiling long after he was gone. "If you fight me on this, you will lose badly." The sentence replayed in her mind over and over, not because she was frightened exactly, because she finally understood who Corey really was beneath the polished image. For years, she mistook confidence for strength. Now she realized much of it had always been entitlement. Corey genuinely believed he was the more powerful person in the marriage, the one with money, connections, status, and maybe until now he had been right. But power shifted the moment someone stopped cooperating with their own mistreatment. At 9 o'clock, sharp Naomi called. "How bad was last night?" Inez stood in the kitchen, holding coffee she barely tasted. He brought Brielle into the house. Silence. Then Naomi muttered, "Wow. He's spiraling faster than I expected." Inez leaned against the marble counter. "He threatened me." Naomi's voice changed immediately. "What exactly did he say?" Inez repeated the sentence carefully. "If you fight me on this, you will lose badly." Another silence. Longer this time. "Good," Naomi finally said. Inez frowned slightly. Good threats mean panic. That sentence settled into her slowly. Naomi continued. "Men who feel fully in control don't threaten. They manipulate quietly. Corey's losing emotional control of the narrative." Inez looked out toward the gray backyard. "I don't feel powerful." "You don't need to feel powerful yet," Naomi replied calmly. "You just need to stop surrendering automatically." Something inside Inez softened painfully at those words, because surrender had become instinct over the years. Small compromises, small silences, small self-abandonments, until eventually Corey's comfort mattered more than her dignity. Naomi's voice sharpened again. "I need you to do something today." "What? Gather evidence?" The word made Inez uneasy. Evidence sounded criminal, cold, strategic. But maybe that was the problem. Women like Inez were conditioned to prioritize emotional morality even while being emotionally destroyed. Corey clearly wasn't operating that way anymore. "What kind of evidence?" she asked quietly. "Everything." Naomi listed items quickly. Bank statements, texts, emails, property documents, schedules, photos, proof of financial contributions, proof of emotional labor tied to company advancement. The list felt endless. By noon, the dining room table looked like an active investigation again. Folders covered nearly every inch of polished wood. Inez moved carefully through 15 years of marriage, like an archaeologist, uncovering evidence of her own disappearance. Old gala photographs, investor event invitations, charity auctions she organized, emails from Corey thanking her for saving the evening after difficult client dinners. She stopped suddenly at one photograph. Corey standing at a podium, accepting an entrepreneurship award. Inez beside him smiling in a silver gown. The memory hit instantly. That night, Corey forgot half his speech backstage because of panic. Inez rewrote it with him in the hotel bathroom 15 minutes before he went on stage. He won the award, and afterward he thanked everyone publicly except her. At the time, she told herself it didn't matter. Now she understood how often she erased herself before Corey even had to. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A text from Corey. Not emotional, not personal, just logistics. Board dinner Thursday. Need confirmation if you're attending. Inez stared at the message in disbelief. He still wanted her functioning beside him publicly, while privately dismantling her life. The cruelty of that nearly fascinated her. No mention of last night. No apology for bringing Brielle into the house. No acknowledgement of threatening her. Just reputation management. Her fingers hovered over the phone. Then slowly, deliberately, she typed, "We need to discuss the financial accounts first." 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared, then reappeared again. "Finally, I don't know what Naomi's putting in your head, but don't make this adversarial." Adversarial. Interesting word choice. Not painful, not tragic. Adversarial. Corporate language for emotional destruction. Inez typed back carefully. You already made it adversarial when you hid assets before asking for a divorce. The typing bubble appeared immediately this time, then vanished again. No response. Good. Let him sit with discomfort for once. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Lorraine? Again. This time she looked even more exhausted. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. You don't have to apologize. Lorraine stepped inside, slowly glancing around the immaculate house with visible sadness. It already feels different here. Because it was, the illusion had cracked, and once illusion breaks, even beautiful homes feel haunted. Lorraine sat carefully at the dining table, surrounded by paperwork. For several moments, she simply stared at everything. Then quietly asked, Did Corey threaten you? Inez looked up sharply. He called you. Lorraine nodded weakly. He said you're turning the divorce into a financial attack. A bitter laugh escaped Inez instantly. Of course. Corey cheated publicly and somehow still positioned himself as the victim. He moved money, Inez said quietly. Lorraine closed her eyes briefly. I know. That stunned her. Lorraine looked deeply ashamed. Martin suspected something before he died. The room went still. Inez slowly sat down across from her. What do you mean? Lorraine hesitated carefully. Your father-in-law loved Corey, but near the end, he became worried. About what he said, Corey started treating relationships like negotiations. The sentence landed painfully because it was true. Lorraine folded her hands tightly together. Martin warned him once. Inez's chest tightened. What did he say? Lorraine's eyes filled with sadness. He told Corey that the most dangerous thing a man can do is mistake loyalty for weakness. Silence swallowed the room. Inez looked down slowly at the paperwork spread across the table. At the marriage reduced to evidence. At 15 years, translated into legal strategy. Then she whispered something she hadn't admitted aloud yet. I don't even know if he ever really loved me. Lorraine answered immediately. Oh, he did. Inez looked up. Lorraine's expression broke her heart. That's the tragedy. A long silence followed. Then Lorraine added quietly, but somewhere along the way, Corey started loving what you did for him more than who you were. The truth of it nearly shattered her, because that was exactly what it felt like. Not discarded because she lacked value, discarded because Corey believed her value would remain available no matter how badly he treated her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Corey. It was Naomi. A forwarded internal company email. Subject line, urgent, preliminary audit inquiry. Inez's heartbeat slowed instantly. Beneath it was one short message from Naomi. He's in trouble. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, Inez didn't feel grief rising inside her chest. She felt clarity. And clarity no longer sounded like survival. It sounded like consequences. Corey came home just after midnight. Inez heard the front door close softly downstairs while she sat alone in the library pretending to read. The house had become strange at night, too quiet, too elegant, like a luxury hotel. After a scandal, nobody discussed publicly. She didn't look up immediately when Corey entered the room, but she felt his energy shift the air anyway. Tense, controlled, angry beneath the surface. You're still awake. Inez turned another page calmly. So are you. Corey loosened his tie slowly, watching her carefully. For the first time in 15 years, they looked at each other like opponents instead of partners. It was astonishing how quickly intimacy could become distance. Corey poured himself whiskey from the crystal decanter beside the fireplace. His movements were sharper than usual, less polished. Good. The audit was getting to him. You spoke to board members, he asked casually. Too casually. Inez finally looked up from her book. No. Corey held her gaze. Interesting. Silence stretched between them. Inez noticed tiny things now she once ignored. The tension in his jaw, the exhaustion under his eyes, the slight irritation in the way he held the glass. Corey Sutton was unraveling carefully, like an expensive watch beginning to crack internally. I know about the audit, she said quietly. His expression barely changed, but barely was enough. Who told you? So, it's real. Corey exhaled sharply. For God's sake, Inez companies get audited all the time. Maybe. But men who weren't nervous usually didn't come home after midnight looking like they'd aged 5 years. Inez closed the book slowly. You moved money through Brielle. Corey's patience visibly thinned. We already discussed this. No, she replied calmly. You avoided it. He walked closer now, dangerously controlled. I am warning you right now not to repeat accusations you don't understand. There it was again. The intimidation Naomi predicted. Corey always relied on intellectual superiority when emotional control failed. But something had changed inside Inez. She no longer automatically believed he knew more than she did. That apartment lease wasn't hidden very well, she said softly. Corey froze, just for a second, but enough. And suddenly, the entire room changed. Because now he knew she had evidence, real evidence, not suspicions, not emotional reactions, facts. His voice lowered instantly. You went through my things? Interesting. Not denial. Violation. That's what bothered him. Inez stood slowly from the chair. You brought another woman into my house. Our house. Stop correcting ownership when you already tried removing me from it legally. That landed harder than he expected. She saw it immediately. Corey took another drink instead of responding. A stalling tactic. I didn't want this to become ugly, he muttered finally. Inez almost laughed. Ugly, the favorite word of men facing consequences. As though ugliness magically began the moment women stopped suffering quietly. You had 8 months to think about ugliness, she said calmly. Corey's eyes snapped toward her. What? The apartment lease. Silence. Then you looked through private legal documents. No, Inez replied softly. I looked through evidence of my husband building another life while sleeping beside me. The truth of it hung brutally between them. Corey looked away first. That surprised her. For years, Corey rarely looked away during conflict. But tonight, he seemed tired. Not remorseful, just tired. Like maintaining multiple realities had finally become exhausting. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, he said quietly. There it was. The pivot. Self-victimization. Corey stepped closer to the fireplace. The company's growing faster than ever. Investors are brutal right now. The board expects impossible things. Inez stared at him in disbelief. You cheated on me because you were stressed. That's not what I said. Then what exactly are you saying? Corey rubbed his forehead hard. I'm saying things got complicated. Complicated. Always complicated. Men like Corey loved complexity because it blurred accountability. Inez crossed her arms tightly. No, she said quietly. You made choices. Corey's expression hardened again. You think this is simple? I think loyalty was simple. That hit him. She saw it instantly. Good. For years, Corey treated loyalty like background furniture. Something permanent. Something that would exist regardless of how carelessly he behaved. Now suddenly, he was being forced to look directly at what he destroyed. Corey stared into his whiskey glass. You stopped seeing me years ago. The sentence surprised her. Not because it was true, because he sounded almost honest for a moment. Inez's chest tightened painfully. Excuse me. You saw the version of me you wanted to believe in. His voice dropped lower. The successful husband, the provider, the stable man. And what were you actually? Corey looked at her finally. Tired. That word hit differently than she expected. Not enough to excuse betrayal. Never enough. But enough to make the grief inside her ache again. Because once upon a time, she would have held him through exhaustion, would have fought beside him, would have chosen him. But Corey never gave her that choice. He quietly chose Brielle instead. I would have stayed through hard times, she whispered. Corey's jaw tightened instantly. That's the problem. Inez frowned. What you always stayed. Silence. Heavy, devastating silence. And suddenly she understood. Corey stopped respecting endurance because he mistook it for inevitability. He believed she would never leave, no matter what he did, no matter how cold he became, no matter how humiliating the betrayal. A dangerous sadness moved through her chest, because maybe she taught him that. Maybe every swallowed disappointment slowly convinced Corey her forgiveness had no limit. You made my loyalty feel cheap, she said quietly. Corey looked genuinely unsettled by that sentence. Good. He should be. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Corey set his glass down carefully. The board gala is next Friday. Inez nearly laughed from disbelief. Even now. Even now he was thinking about appearances. You cannot be serious. I need you there. Need. Not want. Need. Because public image mattered more to Corey than emotional truth. You're unbelievable. Corey stepped closer. If we look unstable publicly, right now, it complicates everything. Everything for who? He didn't answer immediately. Which answered everything. For him. Always for him. Inez shook her head slowly. You brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner, and now you want me standing beside you at a gala smiling for photographs, Corey's voice sharpened. Brielle is not coming. That surprised her. Interesting. Very interesting. Why not? He hesitated. And in that hesitation, Inez understood. Brielle was becoming inconvenient too, because affairs felt glamorous until consequences entered the room. Corey suddenly looked exhausted again. Older somehow. Like the image he spent years constructing was becoming too heavy to carry. I just need this handled quietly, he muttered. There it was. The truth. Not heartbreak. Not regret. Damage control. Inez looked at the man she once thought would protect her forever. And suddenly she realized something devastating. Corey didn't fear losing her emotionally. He feared losing control publicly. That was the real tragedy of loving powerful men sometimes. You mistook being valued privately for being respected deeply. Then the crisis came, and you discovered reputation mattered more than your heart ever did. Corey picked up his whiskey again. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Inez held his gaze steadily. No, Corey. Her voice was calm now, cold in a way it had never been before. You just never imagined I would stop making things easy for you. For the first time all night, Corey had absolutely nothing to say. The gala took place at the Astoria Grand in Manhattan. Of course it did. Corey Sutton loved places that looked expensive enough to intimidate people before he even spoke. Crystal chandeliers hung above hundreds of guests dressed in black silk and tailored tuxedos. Waiters moved gracefully through the ballroom, carrying champagne trays beneath soft golden lighting. Everything shimmered. Money, power, image. Inez stood in front of the hotel mirror inside her suite upstairs, staring at her reflection silently. For several long seconds, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was elegant, controlled, sharp in a way she hadn't been for years. Her black gown draped perfectly against her figure, simple but devastatingly sophisticated. Naomi insisted on hiring a stylist after hearing Corey plan to parade his public image tonight. Men like Corey weaponize appearances, Naomi said earlier that afternoon. So tonight we make sure yours reminds him exactly what he's losing. At the time, Inez thought the comment was petty. Now she understood it wasn't pettiness. It was strategy. The hotel suite door opened behind her. Naomi stepped inside carrying 2 folders and an expression that immediately sharpened the air in the room. You look incredible. Inez gave a small smile. I feel like I'm walking into a funeral. Naomi shut the door. You are. Inez turned toward her. The audit Naomi crossed the room slowly. Worse than we expected. A cold feeling settled low in Inez's stomach. Naomi handed her 1 folder. Inside were preliminary findings from internal investigators connected to Sutton Consulting Group. Unapproved transfers, consulting irregularities, questionable reimbursements tied to Carter Strategies LLC. Corey's name appeared repeatedly. Inez stared at the documents silently. This could destroy him. Naomi's expression remained unreadable. He should have thought about that before financially intertwining his affair. The ballroom noise echoed faintly beneath the suite door. Laughter, music, glasses clinking. A room full of wealthy people celebrating power while Corey's empire quietly cracked underneath him. Inez looked down again at the papers, and strangely, she didn't feel satisfaction, just sadness, because 15 years ago, she would have protected Corey from this without hesitation. Now she was preparing to watch him collapse publicly. Naomi studied her carefully. Don't soften now. I'm not. Yes, you are. Inez looked away. Naomi stepped closer. Listen to me carefully. Corey built this disaster himself. You did not create his choices. I know. Then stop carrying emotional responsibility for his consequences. That landed hard, because women like Inez often confused compassion with obligation. Even now, part of her still wanted to save him. Naomi's voice gentled slightly. You can love someone and still refuse to let them destroy you. Silence settled between them. Then Naomi checked her watch. Board members are already downstairs. Inez inhaled slowly. Time. It was time. 20 minutes later, the ballroom fell quieter as Corey Sutton entered. And even from across the room, Inez could feel it immediately. The performance had begun. Corey looked immaculate in a dark tuxedo, tailored perfectly to his body. Confident smile, relaxed posture, calm executive energy. To everyone else, he still looked powerful. But Inez noticed the cracks now. The stiffness in his shoulders, the tension around his mouth, the way his eyes kept scanning the room. Corey wasn't calm. He was managing panic professionally. Several executives greeted him immediately. Handshakes, smiles, polite laughter. Men pretending not to notice rumors while quietly calculating their distance from scandal. Corporate America loved morality only after exposure. Then Corey saw her. And for one brief second, his entire expression changed. Not because she looked beautiful, though she did, but because she no longer looked emotionally dependent on him. That frightened him more. Inez walked calmly into the ballroom beside Naomi. Heads turned almost instantly. Whispers followed softly through the room. Not cruel whispers, curious ones. Because everyone had heard some version of the story already. And now they were watching the wife arrive. Corey crossed the ballroom toward her quickly. What are you doing with Naomi straight to control? No hello? No compliment? No warmth? Naomi smiled politely before Inez could answer. Good evening, Corey. He barely acknowledged her. Interesting. He was nervous enough to forget charm. Corey lowered his voice immediately. We agreed to keep this private. Inez held his gaze steadily. No. You decided that after humiliating me publicly. His jaw tightened. People nearby were beginning to notice tension now. Corey forced a smile instantly for the audience around them. Can we not do this here? There it was again. Image management. Always image management. Inez looked around the ballroom slowly. The same people who attended their charity events, their Christmas parties, their anniversary dinners. People who praised Corey's success for years without ever noticing the woman silently supporting it. Suddenly, she felt strangely calm. Richard Hales approached moments later, one of the senior board members. Older, quietly intimidating. The kind of man who rarely wasted words. Mrs. Sutton, Inez is fine. Richard nodded respectfully. You look lovely tonight. Corey interrupted too quickly. Richard will speak later. But Richard didn't move. Interesting again. Instead, he looked directly at Inez. I wanted to personally thank you for cooperating with preliminary inquiries. Corey went completely still beside her. Absolute stillness. Dangerous stillness. The room around them suddenly felt colder. Inez, Corey said quietly, what exactly have you shared? Naomi answered smoothly before she could. Only documents legally relevant to ongoing financial review. Corey stared at her. Pure fury flashed beneath his polished expression. But he couldn't explode here. Not publicly, not in front of board members. That was the beauty of rooms like this. Powerful men depended on performance. And tonight, Corey's performance was beginning to fracture. Richard adjusted his cufflinks calmly. There are concerns regarding certain financial structures tied to Carter Strategies. Brielle's fake consulting company. Corey's face darkened instantly. This is not the appropriate time. No, Richard replied evenly. Actually, timing is precisely the concern. A brutal silence followed. Then music swelled across the ballroom again as staff prepared for Corey's keynote speech. The irony nearly made Inez dizzy. Moments from now, Corey was supposed to stand on stage discussing leadership and integrity, while his private life and financial decisions quietly detonated behind the scenes. Corey leaned toward her sharply. You're making a catastrophic mistake. His smile remained perfectly polished for nearby guests. Only his eyes betrayed him. Inez looked at the man she once would have defended against anyone. And suddenly, she realized something profound. For years, Corey believed she was harmless because she was kind. He mistook gentleness for weakness, loyalty for blindness, love for permanent surrender. Now he was finally discovering the difference. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly. An announcer stepped toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Corey Sutton. Applause filled the room. Corey straightened, automatically mask, sliding perfectly back into place. But before he walked away, Inez spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. You should have treated your wife better before teaching her how dangerous the truth could become. Corey stared at her for one long second, then turned and walked toward the stage, and for the first time since the anniversary dinner, Inez didn't feel like the abandoned woman anymore. She felt like the reckoning. Corey Sutton had always been excellent on stage. That was part of his power. He knew how to speak like a man who believed in integrity, even while quietly betraying people behind closed doors. As he stepped beneath the ballroom lights, applause followed him naturally. Investors smiled, executives lifted champagne glasses, cameras flashed softly around the room. From a distance, he still looked untouchable, but Inez noticed the tremor in his hand when he adjusted the microphone. Tiny, almost invisible. Fear. Good. Corey smiled smoothly at the crowd. Good evening, everyone. His voice carried perfectly through the ballroom. Confident, measured, familiar. For years, hearing that voice made Inez feel safe. Now she heard calculation inside every syllable. Corey thanked investors first, then partners, then board members. Not once did he look toward her. Interesting. Maybe even now he still believed ignoring her publicly minimized her importance. Then he began speaking about leadership, about loyalty, about vision. The irony was almost unbearable. Naomi leaned slightly toward Inez and whispered, This man really chose fraud and infidelity while sounding like a motivational podcast. A surprised laugh escaped before Inez could stop it. Several nearby guests glanced toward them briefly. Corey noticed immediately from the stage. Their eyes met, and for one split second, his polished rhythm faltered. Just slightly, but enough. Because Corey knew something the audience didn't. Inez wasn't sitting silently beside him anymore. She had evidence. She had legal representation. And worst of all, she was no longer emotionally obedient. Corey recovered quickly. Men like him always did. And true success, he continued smoothly, is built through trust. The word trust echoed through the ballroom. Inez nearly looked away, because once upon a time she trusted him completely. With money, with grief, with dreams, with her future. That kind of trust was sacred, and Corey destroyed it like it was disposable. Applause followed the end of his sentence. Polite, automatic. Corporate applause often sounded more transactional than sincere. Richard Hale stood near the front table, expression unreadable. Grant Ellison, the CFO, looked visibly uncomfortable. Interesting again. The panic was spreading quietly through the executive level. Corey moved into the final section of his speech, the inspirational portion, the part designed to make wealthy people feel morally elegant while drinking expensive wine. I believe loyalty matters more than ambition, Corey said calmly. That did it. Something inside Inez hardened completely, not from rage anymore, from clarity. Because the most dangerous lies weren't loud, they were polished enough to resemble truth. Before she could second guess herself, Inez stood. The movement was subtle, but noticeable. The ballroom quieted instinctively. Corey froze almost imperceptibly on stage, and suddenly, every eye in the room shifted toward her. Naomi didn't stop her. She simply leaned back slowly and watched. Good. Inez walked calmly across the ballroom floor. No rushing, no tears, no chaos. The sound of her heels echoed softly beneath the chandeliers. People moved aside automatically. Corey's smile tightened. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly as she approached the stage. Inez looked up at him, finishing the truth. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his face. Real panic this time. Not irritation, not frustration. Fear. Good. She stepped beside him beneath the lights. The room had gone completely silent now. Some guests looked horrified, others fascinated. A few women looked almost hopeful. Inez accepted the microphone carefully. For a moment, she simply looked out across the ballroom. 15 years of dinners, events, fundraisers, performances, all leading here. Then she smiled softly. "I won't keep anyone long." Her voice surprised even herself. Steady, warm, controlled. Corey stood beside her rigidly, dangerously rigid. "I just wanted to say something about loyalty." The silence deepened. Inez glanced briefly toward Corey before continuing. "I think sometimes the most invisible people in powerful rooms are the ones holding those rooms together." A few women in the audience exchanged glances immediately. Recognition. Inez continued carefully. The wives who remember birthdays, the women who host dinners, the partners who quietly support dreams before those dreams become profitable. Corey's jaw tightened visibly now, but he couldn't interrupt, not without looking cruel publicly. And sometimes, she continued softly, those women become so good at supporting someone else's success that eventually they disappear inside it. The ballroom remained frozen. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Inez looked directly at the audience now. "For years, I thought loyalty meant enduring anything quietly." Her voice nearly cracked there, but she held steady. "I thought love meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger." A painful stillness settled across the room, because too many people understood exactly what she meant. Corey stepped slightly closer. "We should talk privately." Into the microphone, Inez replied gently. "That's interesting, Corey." A few uncomfortable laughs broke through the room, because privacy didn't seem very important at our anniversary dinner. There it was, the scandal. Public now. A visible shockwave moved through the ballroom instantly. Corey's face lost color. Not much, but enough. He lowered his voice sharply. "Inez." She turned toward him calmly. "No," she said softly. "You already had your turn controlling the story." That sentence landed like glass breaking, because everyone suddenly understood. The rumors were true. Worse than true. Corey looked furious now beneath the polished surface, but fury trapped inside public performance looked almost pathetic. Inez turned back toward the audience. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone tonight." The irony nearly made Naomi smile behind her champagne glass. "But I do think truth matters." Richard Hales folded his arms slowly near the front table, watching, waiting. Inez inhaled carefully. There are women who spend years protecting powerful men from discomfort while quietly abandoning themselves. Silence. And one day, she continued, those women wake up. A few guests actually began clapping softly. Not many. Just enough. Corey looked stunned by that, because suddenly this wasn't becoming a humiliation story. It was becoming recognition. Inez handed the microphone back slowly. Then she looked directly at Corey one final time beneath the ballroom lights. You taught me something very painful. Her voice softened, but important. Corey stared at her silently. Inez smiled sadly. A woman being kind does not mean she's weak. The ballroom erupted into applause before Corey could respond. Real applause this time, not corporate politeness. Something emotional, something human. Corey stood frozen beside her while the room shifted around him, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he looked exposed. Not because his wife screamed, not because she caused chaos, but because she remained dignified while telling the truth. And dignity made his behavior look even uglier. Then Naomi stood smoothly from her seat and crossed the ballroom carrying a slim legal folder. Corey saw it immediately. His face changed completely. Pure alarm now. Naomi stopped beside him politely. Corey Sutton, she said calmly, you've officially been served. The ballroom went silent all over again. Every executive nearby stared openly now. Corey looked at the papers like they were poison. This is unbelievable. Naomi smiled faintly. No, she replied. Actually, this is documentation. Grant Ellison looked physically sick near the front table. Richard Hales said nothing at all, which somehow felt worse. Corey turned toward Inez slowly, and in his eyes now, for the very first time, she saw it. He finally understood she was no longer the woman who would protect him from consequences. The fallout began before the gala even ended. That was the thing about powerful men. People admired them loudly until they smelled weakness. Then suddenly, everyone became morally concerned. Inez stood near the ballroom exit while conversations exploded quietly behind her. Executives whispered into phones. Investors gathered in tense circles. Board members disappeared into private rooms with legal teams. The atmosphere no longer felt glamorous. It felt predatory. Corey remained near the stage surrounded by damage control. And for the first time since Inez met him, he looked alone. Not physically. People still stood around him, but emotionally, completely alone. Naomi approached, holding her champagne glass casually. You okay? Inez looked toward the ballroom. Corey was arguing quietly with Richard Hales now. No, she admitted softly, but I think I finally stopped being afraid of him. Naomi smiled faintly. That's usually the beginning. The beginning of what freedom, revenge, rebirth Inez wasn't sure yet. All she knew was that something irreversible had happened tonight. Not publicly. Internally. She no longer viewed Corey as emotionally larger than herself. That changed everything. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A message from Corey. Do not leave. She stared at the screen. No please. No explanation. Still commanding. Still assuming access. Inez locked the phone without replying. Naomi noticed immediately. Let me guess. Control disguised as urgency. A tired smile crossed Inez's face. Something like that. By midnight, online gossip had already started spreading through private business circles. Not public news yet, but wealthy communities operated like nervous systems. Information moved quickly between charity boards, investor wives, executive assistants, and discreet social media accounts. Corey Sutton's perfect image was beginning to crack, and cracks terrified men like Corey more than heartbreak ever could. The next morning, Inez woke in the Manhattan hotel suite, alone. For several seconds, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned all at once. The speech, the ballroom, the legal papers, Corey's face. Strangely, she didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted, like surviving emotional war required more energy than grief itself. Her phone contained 17 missed calls. 4 from Corey, 3 from Lorraine, several from unknown numbers, and 1 message from Brielle. Inez stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. I didn't know about the financial stuff. He lied to me too. Interesting. Not an apology. A defense. But still, fear leaked through the message. Good. Fear meant reality finally reached her too. Naomi arrived an hour later, carrying coffee and legal folders. You're trending privately among rich people. Inez blinked. That sounds horrifying. It should. Naomi sat across from her. The board suspended Corey pending investigation. Even though she expected it, hearing the words aloud still felt surreal. Suspended. Corey built his entire identity around being admired, around being respected, around walking into rooms and feeling powerful. Now people were questioning him publicly, and no amount of expensive suits could fix that. Naomi handed her another document. More findings. Inez scanned the pages slowly. Additional transfers, unauthorized reimbursements, luxury travel tied to Carter strategies. The deeper investigators looked, the uglier things became. He's in serious trouble, Naomi said quietly. Inez looked down at the papers. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, but mostly she felt grief for the man Corey used to be before ego swallowed him whole. Naomi watched her carefully. You still love him? It wasn't a question. Inez looked away toward the hotel windows. Yes. The honesty hurt. Naomi nodded slowly. That's unfortunate. A sad laugh escaped Inez. Probably. Love makes women hesitate at the exact moment men start strategizing. That sentence settled heavily inside her chest. Because it was true. Even now, after everything, part of her still instinctively wanted to soften the blow for Corey, to protect him emotionally, to reduce his shame, but Corey never protected hers. Not at the restaurant, not during the affair, not while moving money secretly, not when threatening her. Love without mutual protection eventually became self-destruction. By late afternoon, Inez returned briefly to the Connecticut house. The moment she stepped inside, the silence felt different, emptier, like the illusion finally died completely. She walked slowly through rooms she once adored, the dining room where she hosted endless executive dinners, the living room Brielle sat inside, the kitchen where Corey handed her divorce papers. Every room carried emotional fingerprints now. Halfway upstairs, she stopped. Corey's office door was open. That was unusual. Corey hated anyone touching his office. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar wood. Financial books lined dark shelves. Awards covered one wall. Photographs with investors, politicians, executives. An entire room dedicated to ambition. Inez stepped inside carefully, and suddenly she noticed something strange. Several framed photographs were missing. Family photographs. Only the professional ones remained. Her chest tightened painfully. Corey was already editing her out of his environment, even now, even after 15 years. She moved toward the desk slowly, then froze. A single photograph remained near the corner. Nantucket, 15 years earlier. Corey holding her on the beach, both smiling like they genuinely believed love would protect them from becoming strangers. Inez picked up the frame carefully. Her eyes burned instantly, not because she missed the marriage, because she missed who they used to be before power poisoned everything. The front door slammed downstairs. Corey. She heard his footsteps immediately. Fast. Angry. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway. And for the first time, Corey Sutton looked wrecked. Not physically, but internally. His tie hung loose. His eyes looked exhausted. The polished confidence had cracked badly around the edges. You spoke to Brielle straight to confrontation. No hello. Inez set the photograph down carefully. She texted me. Corey laughed bitterly under his breath. Of course she did. Interesting. No defense of Brielle now. No romance. Just frustration. Because once pressure entered the situation, fantasy collapsed. Corey stepped fully into the office. She's threatening legal cooperation. Inez stared at him quietly, and suddenly she realized something devastating. Corey genuinely thought the women in his life existed to stabilize his mistakes. Brielle, Inez, even his mother. He expected emotional labor automatically. You lied to her too? Inez said softly. Corey rubbed his face aggressively. I was managing a complicated situation. No. He was managing multiple realities, different versions of himself for different audiences. And now those realities were colliding. Inez? His voice changed suddenly, softer now, more human, more dangerous. Because this was the charm Naomi warned her about. Corey stepped closer slowly. I never wanted things to go this far. There it was. Not regret for betrayal, regret for consequences. He looked around the office helplessly. The board thinks I'm some criminal. You moved money through your mistress. She wasn't just my mistress. The sentence slipped out instinctively. And there it was again. Emotion, attachment. Something real existed between Corey and Brielle, whether he admitted it or not. But suddenly, even that relationship looked broken. Corey looked at Inez differently now, not arrogantly, desperately. I need you to help me fix this. The words hollowed her out completely. Because after everything, after the humiliation, the threats, the lies, he still instinctively turned to her when things collapsed, like she was emotional emergency shelter. Inez felt tears sting her eyes unexpectedly. Not from weakness, from realization. She had spent 15 years teaching Corey she would always carry the emotional weight he dropped. No more. You don't miss me, she whispered softly. Corey froze. Inez held his gaze steadily. You miss being protected by me. The truth hit him visibly, hard, and for the first time since she met him, Corey Sutton had absolutely nowhere to hide from it. The office went completely silent after Inez spoke. You miss being protected by me? Corey stared at her like the sentence physically wounded him. Good. Truth often hurt more than screaming. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Rain tapped softly against the tall office windows, while late afternoon shadows stretched across the room Corey once considered his sanctuary. Now it felt like a courtroom. Corey looked away first. That alone felt unfamiliar. For years, Corey Sutton moved through conflict with polished confidence. Even during arguments, he usually carried himself like the person with more leverage. Now he just looked tired, human, and strangely smaller. Inez, he said quietly. But whatever sentence he planned died before reaching his mouth. Because what exactly could he say now? Sorry too late? I love you. Complicated by another woman and months of deception. I made a mistake. No. Mistakes were accidental. This had been deliberate, layered, strategic. Corey leaned heavily against the desk. The board wants me to step down temporarily. Inez said nothing. He laughed bitterly under his breath. Richard looked at me like I was contagious. A sharp ache moved through her chest despite herself. Not because Corey didn't deserve consequences, but because once upon a time, seeing him hurt would have destroyed her. Now she mostly felt exhausted. Corey rubbed both hands over his face. I built that company from nothing. No, Inez replied softly. We built it. The correction landed instantly. Corey's eyes lifted toward her. Pain flickered across his expression. Real pain this time. Not reputation panic, not anger, something deeper. Because maybe finally he was being forced to confront the full truth. He did not rise alone. Someone loved him through every insecure phase of becoming powerful. Someone held his fear privately while he displayed confidence publicly. Someone sacrificed quietly so he could shine loudly. And he repaid that loyalty by humiliating her in a restaurant. Corey sat down slowly in the leather chair behind the desk. For the first time since Inez met him, he looked emotionally unguarded. I don't know when everything changed, he admitted. Inez crossed her arms tightly. Yes, you do? His jaw tightened faintly. No, I really don't. But she did. She knew exactly when things changed. Not one dramatic moment, 1,000 small ones. The first time Corey mocked her business as cute. The first investor dinner where he introduced her only as my wife instead of mentioning her work. The nights he stopped asking about her dreams. The years he slowly trained her to shrink around his ambition. People always thought betrayal began with affairs. But sometimes betrayal started long before another person entered the picture. Sometimes it began the first moment someone stopped valuing your humanity equally. You started treating love like a service. Inez said quietly. Corey looked up slowly. What you stopped seeing me as your partner. Her voice remained calm, measured, deadly in its honesty. You saw me as someone who managed your life for you. Silence. I handled your family, she continued softly. Your events, your emotions, your home, your image. Corey swallowed visibly now, and eventually, Inez whispered, You forgot I was a person outside of what I could do for you? The truth of it settled heavily through the office. Because Corey knew she was right. That was the worst part. He knew. Corey stood suddenly and walked toward the windows. I never meant to hurt you like this. Inez almost laughed. Not cruelly, just tiredly. You keep saying that, because it's true. No, she replied softly. If you didn't mean to hurt me, you would have stopped the first moment you realized you were capable of it. Corey closed his eyes briefly. Outside rain blurred the Connecticut skyline into soft gray shapes. Everything felt heavy now, like the entire marriage was finally collapsing under the weight of truths ignored too long. I loved you, Corey said quietly. The words sliced through her chest anyway, because part of her would always love the man he used to be. That was grief's final cruelty. It forced you to mourn people still standing in front of you. Inez looked down at the old Nantucket photograph resting on the desk. You loved what I gave you, she whispered. Corey turned sharply. That's not fair. Fair. Interesting word. After everything, he still wanted fairness. Inez finally looked directly at him. You brought another woman to our anniversary dinner? Corey flinched visibly this time. Good. Let him sit inside that reality fully. You looked relieved while humiliating me, she continued quietly. Do you know what that did to me? He said nothing, because there was no defense, no polished executive language, no corporate spin, only cruelty. Corey's voice dropped lower. I was unhappy. And you think I wasn't? That stopped him instantly. Because for years, Corey unconsciously positioned himself as the only emotionally complex person in the marriage. His stress mattered. His loneliness mattered. His dissatisfaction mattered. Meanwhile, Inez was expected to absorb discomfort gracefully forever. Tears finally filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears, just honest ones. You think I didn't notice you disappearing, she whispered. You think I didn't feel lonely sitting beside you every night while you looked at your phone, instead of me? Corey looked shattered suddenly, and maybe for the first time, he was hearing her instead of managing her. I tried, she said softly. That sentence nearly broke the room apart. Because she had. Therapy suggestions, anniversary dinners, conversations, patience, grace, hope. She tried long after Corey emotionally left the marriage. Corey stared at her helplessly, then quietly said, I thought you'd never leave. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Not passion, not Brielle. Entitlement. He believed her love had no limit. Inez inhaled shakily. That's the problem, Corey. He looked at her silently. You got so comfortable being loved, her voice cracked slightly, that you stopped being careful with my heart. The office fell silent again. Corey's eyes looked wet now, but strangely, that no longer gave her comfort, because remorse after destruction still left destruction behind. Finally, Corey stepped toward her slowly. We can still fix this. The sentence stunned her. Not because it sounded romantic, because it proved he still didn't fully understand. Fix. As if this were damaged furniture. As if betrayal, humiliation, manipulation, and emotional abandonment could simply be repaired now that consequences arrived. Inez shook her head slowly. You don't want to fix us. Corey frowned. Yes, I do. No, she whispered. You want your life back. Silence. Brutal silence, because he knew she was right. Inez reached into her bag slowly and removed the divorce documents Naomi finalized earlier that afternoon. Corey's face changed immediately. Fear again. Real fear. She placed the papers carefully on the desk between them. "I'm not signing because I hate you," she said softly. Corey stared at her without speaking. "I'm signing because I finally love myself enough to stop surviving on crumbs." The sentence shattered whatever remained between them. Corey looked genuinely devastated now, but devastation did not erase accountability. Inez picked up the pen. For one brief second, her hand trembled. 15 years. 15 years of memories, dreams, history, love. Then slowly, steadily, Inez Sutton signed her name, and in that exact moment, she stopped being the woman Corey abandoned. She became the woman who finally chose herself. 6 months later, Inez Sutton no longer woke up with dread sitting on her chest. That was the first thing she noticed. Healing did not arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly, like sunlight slowly returning to a room you forgot could feel warm. Her new apartment overlooked the Hudson River from the west side of Manhattan. It was smaller than the Connecticut house Corey fought so hard to keep, but every inch of it belonged to her emotionally. No ghosts, no manipulation, no performances, just peace. The apartment smelled faintly of sandalwood and fresh coffee as morning light spilled across design sketches spread over the dining table. Her dining table. That detail still mattered to her sometimes. Inez sat barefoot in oversized cream pajamas, reviewing fabric samples for a new client while jazz played softly in the background. A year ago, she would have been planning Corey's schedule, managing his appearances, supporting his ambition. Now she was rebuilding her own life instead. And surprisingly, it fit her beautifully. Her interior design studio officially reopened 3 months after the divorce filing. At first, Inez expected fear, shame, rust. Instead, she discovered something strange. She was still talented, very talented. Clients returned quickly through word of mouth. Wealthy women across Manhattan and Connecticut quietly sought her out not just because of her aesthetic vision, but because they recognized something in her now. Strength. Not loud strength, refined strength. The kind built from surviving humiliation without becoming cruel. Most of her recent clients shared similar stories too. Widows, divorced women, women rebuilding after betrayal. Without planning it intentionally, Inez began specializing in emotional restoration through space design. Bedrooms that felt safe again, homes that felt like identity instead of obligation. Places where women could breathe after years of shrinking themselves. And somehow, helping other women heal quietly helped heal her too. Her phone buzzed softly against the table. "Naomi, tell me you're not working already." Inez smiled. "It's 9:30. Exactly. Unhealthy behavior." Inez laughed softly. That still felt unfamiliar sometimes too. Real laughter. Not polite social laughter, not strategic marriage laughter. Just happiness. Naomi continued. "Lunch today, I can do one." "Good. Also, you officially won." Inez leaned back slightly. "What now?" The audit finalized. A strange stillness moved through her. Even after everything, hearing Corey's name still affected her body before her mind. Naomi's tone softened slightly. "He's resigning permanently." Inez closed her eyes briefly. Corey Sutton, the man who once filled every room with certainty, gone from the company he built, not destroyed completely, but humbled publicly. Consequences finally caught him. "How do you feel?" Naomi asked carefully. Inez thought about it honestly. Not triumphant, not bitter. Mostly sad for the younger version of herself who loved him so deeply, and strangely relieved that she no longer needed his approval to feel valuable. "I feel finished," she answered quietly. Naomi understood immediately. That's healthier than revenge. After the call ended, Inez stood near the apartment windows overlooking the river. 6 months ago, she thought losing Corey would destroy her identity. Now she understood something profound. She never truly lost herself after the divorce. She lost herself slowly during the marriage. And now she was finally returning. Later that evening, Inez found herself standing outside the same restaurant where everything began. The anniversary dinner, the humiliation, the champagne, the ending. For a moment, she considered turning around, but instead she walked inside. The maitre d' recognized her instantly. His expression softened. Ms. Sutton. No pity in his voice, just recognition. "I'd like a table by the window," she said calmly. Minutes later, she sat alone beneath warm candlelight while Manhattan glowed outside. Strangely, the restaurant no longer hurt. Memory softened with distance. Not disappeared, just softened. Victor Lang, the restaurant manager, approached personally. "We haven't seen you in a while." Inez smiled politely. "It's been a complicated year." Victor nodded knowingly, then hesitated slightly. "Would you like the champagne menu tonight?" For one brief second, Inez remembered everything. Corey's face, Brielle's red dress, the humiliation burning through her chest, the satisfaction of leaving him the bill. Back then, ordering the most expensive bottle in the restaurant felt like reclaiming dignity through spectacle. Tonight, she no longer needed spectacle. Inez smiled gently. "Actually, I'll have tea." Victor blinked once in surprise, then smiled back warmly. "Of course." After he walked away, Inez leaned back in the chair quietly, and suddenly she realized something beautiful. She no longer needed expensive gestures to prove her worth. That chapter was over. A familiar male voice interrupted softly beside her. "I had a feeling I'd find you here eventually." Inez looked up. Graham Ellis stood beside the table, smiling gently. Tall, silver at the temples, kind eyes, an architect she recently partnered with on a women's transitional housing project in Brooklyn. Unlike Corey Graham, never filled rooms by demanding attention. He filled them by making people feel comfortable existing inside them. It was a very different kind of masculinity. "You're late," Inez teased softly. "Traffic," he replied. Then he noticed the untouched second teacup across from her. "You ordered for me, I took a risk." Graham sat down smiling. No grand romance, no dramatic rescue. And that mattered deeply to her, because healing wasn't about replacing Corey with another man. It was about learning she deserved tenderness that didn't require self-erasure. For a while, they simply sat together quietly while rain touched the restaurant windows. Peacefully, comfortably. No performance, no manipulation, no walking on emotional glass. Finally, Graham spoke. "You seem lighter lately." Inez looked out toward the city lights. "I think I stopped apologizing for existing." Graham studied her carefully. "That changes everything." Yes, it did. Across the room, another couple celebrated an anniversary with champagne and flowers. Months earlier, the sight would have hurt her. Now, it simply looked human. Love wasn't the enemy. Self-abandonment was. Inez wrapped both hands around the warm teacup, and for the first time in years, she felt entirely present inside her own life, not supporting someone else's story, not shrinking herself to maintain someone else's comfort, just existing honestly. The waitress brought dessert menus moments later. Graham glanced at her playfully. "So he asked, are we ordering something ridiculously expensive tonight?" Inez laughed softly. Real laughter again. Warm, unforced, beautiful. Then she shook her head. "No." She smiled toward the rain-streaked windows. "I already paid enough for lessons this year." And somehow, for the first time since Corey walked into that anniversary dinner, holding another woman's hand, the memory no longer felt like the worst night of her life. It felt like the night she finally woke up. Sometimes the most painful thing in life is not being betrayed. It's realizing how long you betrayed yourself trying to keep someone else comfortable. Inez spent years believing that love meant patience, sacrifice, understanding, and endurance. She thought being a good wife meant giving more forgiving, more shrinking, more. And little by little, she disappeared inside a marriage where her kindness became expected instead of appreciated. That's the danger of loving someone who mistakes loyalty for weakness. People like Corey often don't recognize your value while they still have full access to your heart. They become comfortable being loved, comfortable being forgiven, comfortable believing you will stay no matter how carelessly they treat you. But this story was never truly about revenge. It was about awakening. Because the moment Inez stopped begging to be chosen, she finally chose herself. And that changed everything. Healing did not come from humiliating Corey back. It came from realizing that her worth was never dependent on his ability to see it. The marriage ending did not destroy her. In many ways, it returned her to herself. Sometimes walking away is not giving up. Sometimes walking away is the first honest act of self-love you've committed in years. A healthy love will never require you to abandon your voice, your dreams, your dignity, or your peace just to keep the relationship alive. Real love does not make you feel invisible while benefiting from your presence. And maybe the hardest lesson of all is this: you can deeply love someone and still need to leave them. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself too. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. Do you think Inez did the right thing by walking away from Corey? And have you ever had to choose self-respect over a relationship that was hurting you? Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional drama stories about betrayal, healing, karma, self-worth, and powerful new beginnings. Sometimes one story can remind someone they are not alone,